to what is our last webinar of the year, and it's a good one. Eliminating Waste Through Circularity, a fireside chat with Tom Szaky, the CEO of TerraCycle and Loop. Now, I won't be the one chatting to Tom by the fireplace. That will be IMR's Head of Circular Economy, Dr. Geraldine Brennan. Geraldine oversees the delivery of CIRCULÉIRE, the national platform for circular manufacturing. Geraldine has spent over a decade exploring the barriers and enablers of industry adoption and implementation of circular and sustainable business models. She has had a particularly busy quarter, being invited to give evidence on behalf of CIRCULIRE to the Oireachtas Joint Committee on the Environment relating to the pre-legislative scrutiny of the forthcoming Circular Economy Bill in October. And last week, co-hosting CIRCULIRE's 2021 annual conference at the main stage of the National Manufacturing and Supply Chain Expo in the RDS, which was a huge success. So, welcome, Geraldine.
Thank you, Gary. So it is a very special webinar indeed. It is an absolute delight to have Tom Szaky from TerraCycle and Loop here with us today. But before I welcome our keynote and special guest, I just wanted to give a quick overview of what CIRCULIRE is for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, mindful that Gary's poll highlighted that we have people not only from Ireland, but further afield across Europe, the States. So CIRCULIRE, as Gary highlighted, is the national platform for circular manufacturing. We're the first of its kind in Ireland. We are a public-private partnership that was established in 2020 by Irish Manufacturing Research, which is an Enterprise Ireland and IDA Ireland supported technology centre in the Republic of Ireland, with three strategic partners, the Government of Ireland's Department of the Environment, Climate Action and Communications, Ireland's Environmental Protection Agency, and EIT Climate Kick, one of the largest public-private partnerships funded by the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, dedicated to climate innovation. What you'll see here is our members. So as a public-private partnership, our members are our core, and our whole raison d'etre is about supporting Irish industry, manufacturers and their supply chains to transition towards a circular economy business model. You can see that we are cross-sectoral by nature, ranging from the built environment, food and drinks, packaging, automotive, medical devices, pharmaceuticals and chemicals, ICT and we, textiles, and then a bubble called second life enablers, because the reality is, and we're going to go into this in a lot of detail with Tom, is that companies can't do this alone. They need actors within their supply chains. They need to collaborate not only in their supply chains, but also outside of their own supply chains across sectors to valorize waste. Just quickly, a bit of background in terms of how CIRCULIRE supports Irish industry to capture circular advantage. We operate across 5 key vectors. The first is fundamentally about awareness raising. Ireland over the last 2 years has pivoted and embraced the circular economy agenda, but there's still more work to do. And one of the things that CIRCULIRE has invested in is developing Ireland's first circular economy knowledge repository. This is an open access online database which has reports, case studies, recordings of webinars, conferences, demos of case studies, and the works. And it's something that is a resource to anyone, not just CIRCULIRE industry members. It's available on our website. Another key vector of our work is around knowledge sharing, and we run every year thematic working groups on key focus areas, seeking to demystify the area, demystify the circular opportunities and innovation areas in that topic. And this year we ran them on circular packaging reusables, which is very apt for the webinar today, circular plastics, and also circular design, all very key themes in light of the conversation we're about to have with Tom Szaky. Another key area in the context of Ireland's transition towards circular economy is policy innovation and policy engagement. This year, as Gary highlighted, we've had a very, very important year for circular economy in Ireland because the all of government circular economy strategy consultation was announced, and we're in the final stages of the announcement of a circular economy bill, which will place circular economy on statutory footing, meaning that the government is obliged to prepare a circular economy strategy with sectoral targets over the coming years and into the future. In terms of capacity building, a key area of CIRCULIRE's work with our industry members is about helping them to understand where is structural waste occurring in their manufacturing operations and their supply chains, and ultimately how to transform structural waste into a circular opportunity. Another key area we work with them is around helping them to understand where is the level of circular maturity within their organizations. What kind of capabilities do they need in order to embrace and shift from a linear model towards a circular model? How do they innovate? And this is developed through our online self-assessment toolkits. We also have an interactive circular economy product lifecycle framework, which is linked to case studies and terminology around these different terms to bring the circular economy to life for different sectors. Coming towards definitely the last but not least, when it comes to demonstrators and new ventures, CIRCULIRE has Ireland's first dedicated late stage accelerator for circular ventures, entities that are seeking to demonstrate a circular model or enable circularity in a sector. In terms of demonstrators, we have a ring-fenced innovation fund, and a number of products from a range of different sectors that are seeking to pilot and demonstrate business cases for circular economy before scale up. And last but not least, as again, most people know, collaboration is key in terms of circularity. And CIRCULIRE is very much involved in collaboration with policymakers through the Department of Environment's Waste and Circular Economy Advisory Groups, the Department of Agriculture's Bioeconomy Implementation Groups. At an international level, we're engaged with the OECD policy dialogues on the circular economy, as well as the ISO standards development for circular economy. But without further ado, it is with great pleasure, and I'm just going to stop sharing my slides, to welcome Tom Szaky to the virtual stage for this fireside chats, you know, the colloquial, although it be 11 a.m. in New Jersey, really a pleasure to have you. So again, before I offer you the floor, I just want to give our participants today a little bit of background on you. So not only are you the founder and CEO of TerraCycle, who are a global leader in collection and repurposing of complex waste streams, TerraCycle has in operation across 21 countries, and they work with some of the biggest brands and retailers and manufacturers, all with the efforts of creating take-back schemes, national platforms that enable products and packaging that currently go to landfill or incineration to be diverted. But in May 2019, TerraCycle pivoted and has developed another initiative called Loop, which is a circular reuse platform. And this enables consumers to purchase products in durable, reusable packaging. Loop is available in France, the UK, Canada, Japan, and across the United States, with the kind of key raison d'etre of ending the epidemic of waste that is caused by single-use consumption. In 2022, it'll be coming to Australia. And hopefully by the end of this call, we might have insights into when it might be implemented in Ireland, which I know a lot of our participants will be keen to understand. But again, Tom and TerraCycle have won numerous awards. Tom, you've starred in your own, you created and produced your own reality TV show. We're absolutely delighted to have you here today. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you all for attending. Really look forward to the discussion.
So my first question was kind of, as much as I've given a bit of a flavor for what TerraCycle is about, could you know, TerraCycle its tagline is to effectively collect and recycle almost any form of waste, really to get a feel of what TerraCycle is.
Yes.
And kind of the journey you've embarked on over the last 2 decades.
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. So I'm going to give the briefest version of this sort of answer. I think, you know, TerraCycle, let me actually begin with what's really sparked me here to create this company is 2 things. A disillusionment with the purpose of business. The way it was taught to me in my first year of university is that the purpose of business is to maximize profit to shareholders. And I didn't really like that as an answer, even though it was the answer. And I wanted to try to do sort of in my mind, I view profit more as an indicator of health, right? If you're profitable, you're healthy. You're going to flourish and grow and live for a while. And if you're not profitable, well, you're the opposite of healthy and means that as a business, you'll have a shorter life. But it's not the purpose, right? Like we don't live on this planet to be healthy. We live on this planet to hopefully make the world better. And then if we're healthy, we'll do that for a long time. And if we're not healthy, we'll do it for less time. And so that was one. And then the other part is this deep fascination with waste, because waste is a very big problem, right? That's the essence of our conversation today. So it's very purposeful to solve, but it's also filled with all these amazing anomalies that are just the best playground for innovation. So what do I mean by this? Is that, we live in a materialistic world where in no small part our status is equal to how much stuff we have, and we want to accumulate stuff. But isn't it interesting that everything we own will be legally property of a garbage company one day? 99% of it within the year of purchase, mind you. And for how big of a statement that is, an industry that literally owns everything one day, it's the least innovative industry per dollar of revenue it enjoys. And I would argue, and sorry, this is going to come off a bit crude, is that it is, if you think of like industry as a body, maybe IT is our brain and like Hollywood are our eyes and ears, if you take that metaphor, the waste industry is our asphalt, and it's the least desired sort of area for anyone to work, right? It is not what pulls talent and innovation and so on. So you get this confluence of it's the everything with very relative to its revenue, low innovation. And it has lots of other sort of strange academic anomalies. It's the only material that has negative raw material price. There's massive supply, but negative demand. So it has negative price. It's the only material that actually has a price that you're willing to pay someone to get rid of it. And many other such examples. That's sort of the essence of the fascination. Now, TerraCycle started our journey to eliminate the idea of waste by saying, let's make products out of waste. And our first product, I happen to have it here, is this. Liquid worm poop, there's our worm. So organic waste fed to worms, then take the worm poop, liquefied and package it in used soda bottles. Like that's an old Coke bottle. And that's how we began. In fact, where I'm sitting right now used to be a production site to make liquid worm poop. And we started that way in the first 3-4 years, grew to about a $5 million business, along the way, and realized that we're never going to eliminate the idea of waste if we're a product company. Even if we make our products out of garbage, the product is the business hero, right? We're going to focus on making the very best, organic fertilizer, which means even if a requirement is make it from waste, we're going to choose the best waste to make our product. There's actually a big challenge today in the entire recycling industry is everyone wants the best, right? Like, why do only clear soda bottles get recycled or milk jugs? It's because that is the best. And why do dirty diapers and cigarette butts not? Because, well, it's the opposite. And so to be able to address, the undesired aspects of the waste stream, we pivoted our business, shut down the worm poop thing, and sort of evolved to where we are today. And TerraCycle today has 3 major divisions with some emerging ones. The first division asks the question, is that object recyclable? Now, many times people think this idea of an object being recyclable has to do with, can it be recycled? And in fact, almost everything in the world can be. What it really makes something locally recyclable is is it profitable for a garbage company to bother recycling it? Because they're only going to recycle what is profitable for them to do so, like an aluminum can. And so the real challenge in that first division to recycle something like a toothbrush or a dirty diaper is to find first someone who's willing to pay for it, and then figure out how do we collect it and process it. And that's sort of the first major division. The second one focuses then not on collecting and recycling waste, but helping companies integrate waste back into their products. Whether it's unique materials like polycarbonate, Triton, ABS, all the way to traditional materials like aluminum, PET, and HDPE sourced from unique places like the bottom of our oceans or rivers or Aboriginal communities, inner cities, right? So it could be the location being unique or the material itself. Our third division, as your introduction mentioned, is Loop, which is shifting from disposable consumption, where perhaps the best thing to do is collect and recycle and make from recycled materials vis-a-vis circular economy, to reuse-based consumption, where I have some examples here, where your ice cream now looks like this in reusable stainless steel, or if you want to get a cup of coffee at McDonald's, it looks something like that. And I mentioned, we also have our own incubator and emerging divisions. To give you a flavor for what is one of our exciting emerging divisions is next year, our diagnostic division will be up and running. And that has the thesis that certain waste streams carry diagnosable samples, like your air condition filter. Well, is there to filter, out the dirt or mold and mildew in your air? But has anyone ever wondered about analyzing that once it's leaving your air conditioning unit to understand what your air is like? Or you'll see next year launching that exact thesis with diapers, where a diaper carries one pure fecal sample. You may have, in your past, had a doctor prescribe a fecal, analysis, because you can then review the microbiomes that are deposited in the sample, understanding your gut health. So early next year or mid next year, you'll be able to actually take part in that, buy a diagnostic service from a diaper brand, and send your diaper not to be recycled, our first 2 divisions, or reused, our third division, but actually be analyzed for the microbiome, so you can learn about your gut health or your child's gut health in that example. So hopefully that gives, and there's many others, but that hopefully gives you a taste of sort of how we're trying to, as we like to put it, eliminate the idea of waste.
Thank you, Tom. That really does. And just a kind of initial, first question in terms of the things that are on offer in the context of Ireland for either our manufacturers, our retailers, in terms of those divisions, just bring it back to predominantly the Irish audience. Could you give us a flavor for what's on offer in the Irish context?
Yes, absolutely. So today, in all countries that we operate around the world, including Ireland, we have our recycling programs, the first division, and that is typically country by country. So a brand will fund, or a retailer will fund, or someone will fund a recycling program for a category of waste in a market. And there, if you go to TerraCycle.com, you can scroll over to our website for the region and take advantage of some of those programs. I'm going to do that now and be able to give you some examples in a moment. The unique recycled content that looks, here's actually one that it was in Ireland. This is fairy dish soap, but you'll notice this one's made using, there it is, ocean plastic. So we're the ocean plastic. That is a global supply chain and global solutions that pop up in many countries, including Ireland as well, like that bottle has. Then Loop right now is a bit newer. It's only 3 years old as a concept. And so it operates in North America, in Europe, UK, and France, and then in Japan and Australia. And the goal is absolutely to bring that to Ireland. And my guess would be, if not next year, the following, based on the conversations that I've seen, from the retailers. Really, the expansion of Loop, our reuse platform, is not as much predicated on us, much more how our retail partners decide to scale the program and where they choose to deploy it. So one of the key partners of concern on that one that'll help bring it to Ireland will be Tesco, who's been a brilliant partner for us in the UK region.
Okay, thank you. And now you highlighted, with all the different divisions, the three plus the emerging, the diagnostics.
Yes.
When it comes to the question of, is it recyclable? That's obviously, there's technical constraints. And then, as you said, there's the economics of it.
Yes.
And I just wondered, when you say who's going to pay, how have you, with regards to going about making those cases to brands or manufacturers, could you share some insight into that? Because what I've found is that sometimes the economics don't add up in the beginning.
Yes, and they may never, right? So there are certain waste streams where the economics are wonderful, and aluminum can. You don't have to incentivize anyone. The aluminum is valuable enough to have a industry pop up with no subsidy, no nothing, and go out there and collect it, right? A good example of this, by the way, it's a joke, but if you wanted to make a product that will have 100% recycling rates, I have the answer. Just make it from solid gold. You could litter it on the street, no problem, because someone will look at that as so much value, they'll be massively incentivized to pick it up and turn it into something else, right? I mean, that's what it used to be like with metals, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, copper, iron, these things. The moment they were waste, someone, would view it as value and melt it into something else. Then you have certain waste streams that are sort of at the edge, like polypropylene, yogurt cups, for example, where it depends on the community. And that really depends on how much investment has gone in to waste management. Is it a priority or is it not, from a council funding point of view? And those are the ones that, depending on that decision, depending on oil prices, depending on EPR, DRS, extended product responsibility, or deposit return schemes, and other such economic levers, sometimes it's recyclable, sometimes it's not. And then there is, everything from, say, a dirty diaper to a cigarette butt, to, a lot of these complex small items. And remember, we talk a lot about packaging, but all objects also become waste, So it's not just the package, but the physical good itself. The vast majority of goods still, if you look at by weight or by units, fall into the non-recyclable. And there isn't a line of sight to see that tip over unless absurd things happen, like oil becoming 10 times more expensive. The best thing, by the way, to solve this entire issue is high oil prices. That's the macro. I always applaud high oil because everything gets more expensive, which means we consume less, which leads to the only silver bullet in sustainability is buying less. Because circular economy isn't sustainability. I mean, it's not intrinsic sustainability. You know what I mean? It just means that we are not wasting through the process, but there's still energy to turn that circle and impact. And so in the end, really the only thing that, is the silver bullet to our environmental crises is, all of us as citizens buying less stuff, right?
Absolutely. There's a great quote go on.
No, no, I was going to say, please finish your thoughts. Sorry, I didn't answer your question. I was just going to, I just realized that I was going to, just very quickly, the motivation, right, for brands and retailers, if that's the stakeholder that's funding, there's the carrot and stick, right? Carrot is, you know, legislation, NGO concern, citizen concern, you know, and that's really big in your region of the world. It's the epicenter for it, really. So there's a very high amount of that. But a more powerful tool is the carrot. Right, so the stick is what it is. The carrot is how do you help people prefer your stores or your brand over the competition, you know? And if you can tease that out through recycling, that really helps make it something then brands can easily lean in on, because the bigger a recycling program, the more money is needed, and the way you deploy more money is that it shows up somehow, you know, as a good investment.
So just the thing you made me think about when you were talking about effectively the relationship between circular economy and sustainability, and saying that ultimately, you know, the circular economy can go so far, but we have to deal with the elephant in the room, which is consumption.
Yes.
Really good quote, who's the author of which I'll have to just kind of say, I don't remember exactly who it was, but they said, if you're not careful, you could end up with a fast-paced, closed-loop circular economy. But essentially, you're still not solving the big ticket issues. And that made me wonder, have you ever been in a position, and obviously appreciating, you know, kind of client confidentiality, where you've said, you know, you need to eliminate that material. If you're really trying to, you know, this material, we can try and keep it in a technical loop where we bring it back 3 times, but then it's still a monster material. Do you have any examples of materials, or do you have any thoughts on certain products or product sectors where you'd say, you know what, we need to switch material instead of trying setting up these take back recycling schemes to keep them in closed loops?
Yes, absolutely. And so the preface on that is, and it goes to the quote that you had mentioned, is that as citizens, we have to really be conscious of what we buy, because we're the ones voting for, you know, for these different paths for business to take. They're really just following our desires. And what I mean by that is, many times I hear from global companies that operate in many countries, this country's population cares about, you know, circular economy, so we're going to invest there. This other country's population doesn't care, so we're not going to invest. That feedback comes multiple times a week, right? It's in both cases, you know, they acknowledge that it's the same problem with the same output, but it really, you know, the investments where they're going to lean in is driven by where they're going to see the biggest sticks are emerging, and or the biggest carrots can be had, right? It's so important for us to be eyes wide open on that. Now, to answer your question, I think the way like we take a journey with a partner is the very, very first thing, you know, we start on is to say, please design your products into local recycling where you don't need us, right? So we don't launch programs where there is already local recycling solutions. If they can shift to local recycling solutions, we're happy to consult with them and give them guidance. But it's ideally, you don't need, at least our first division, TerraCycle, because that's a response to not designing into local municipal or council recycling. Now, if that's not possible, and there's many examples where it's not possible to do that today, because what is locally recyclable is incredibly limited in its material types, right, and what you can do with it. So then what we say is, okay, well, your object will be the same tomorrow as it is today. Even if you go into big design or, you know, reuse or whatever, it's going to take time to establish. So let's set something up where we can collect that object as it is today. And that actually is sort of an interesting moment occurs with companies. It starts a financial flow. They're now paying, they're funding voluntarily something that they weren't, you know, putting any dollars around before, you know, the end of life of their products. And then that starts creating motivations inside the organization to think about how to solve that, so that you don't have to just keep paying to have a recycling program for something that isn't recyclable. That could take you step back to the first step, which is design into local recyclability. Or in many cases, they've already exhausted that and it's not possible. Then they would look at, well, designing into new methods of consumption, reuse being a wonderful example of that, not just Loop, but refill stations, buying concentrate, pre-fill is what Loop does. But, you know, then that is all about how can our customers access that product in a way that is more circular. And a big part of that is not just the object design, but the system design, the system through which you purchase it and get it back. Because if you don't do that, then you are relying on the only system that's out there for end of life, which is waste management, right? Which is landfill, incineration, or recycling. But you can change the landscape by creating your own system and make it more of a closed loop approach. And there you can actually have way more range in design. Because if you get your object back, You can do all sorts of things that you couldn't do if you're reliant on a local council end-of-life system, like a recycling system.
And I think related to that, I think a lot of we see industry members trying to find the balance between whether they need to get their products or packaging back to themselves, or whether a sectoral approach makes sense, or whether there's an intermediary where they can work with an existing kind of recycling program, be it through a council or a private waste contractor, to effectively achieve the same aims. But I think we're also seeing that linkage between when industries start to get their products back, they start to learn about their products, which can inform the redesign with regards to functionality and again the makeup of materials and ensuring performance. I'm really conscious that this is a very much a whistle stop tour, and I'm keen to get a little bit more insight into Loop Store, and also I know you highlighted when you described the different divisions and the emerging division around diagnostics, but in terms of that pivot to Loop, would you be able to share some insights around the business model underpinning it? Because I know, as I said, it's manufacturers and retailers and brands and yourselves, but in terms of experimenting that in different European cities, any insights you could share I think would be really interesting.
Absolutely. Let me give a couple, right? But I'll start academic and broad, which is, let's remember, reuse used to be the way things were, right? Up until, say, the 1950s, we cobbled our shoes, mended our clothes, we had the milkman, our beverages were reusable here in the United States and in Ireland and everywhere in between. So it's very important to take a thought process on why did disposability win? Because it won hard, and there is a little reuse left, but not like if disposability is the share winner. And it won, I believe, because disposability is unbelievably convenient and affordable. And maybe a third thing, which is it gives you range, right? Like in the milkman model, how many types of milk could you order from the milkman, right? Maybe 2 or 1. But today you can go into a supermarket and see 200 types of milk, from your nut milks to your plant milks to your, normal, let's say, cow-based milks. And so it gives range, it gives convenience, and it gives affordability, which is what we vote for, right? That's that citizen voting thing. And so I think it's really important to not just vilify disposability. I mean, we know the issues, but to honor those benefits, because that's what you have to compete with on reuse. Right? Saying it's just better for the environment only gets a few consumers, right? It's not going to get the real mass market, your Tesco's to your McDonald's, right? And so then we looked at, once we had that sort of learning, we're thinking about, well, how is reuse today, right? Like, what are the options out there today? And there's really 3 major, what one would call modalities of reuse. The first is concentrate fill. You buy a Forever bottle at home, right? Like, here's one. This is, say, for hand soap. It's a nice glass bottle, and then I get little tablets that I put in here, and they, and then I can dilute them. And that model works, but doesn't have range. So it works for things that can be concentrated and can be delivered in such a method. But there are many products that you just couldn't. How do you concentrate a pizza? How do you concentrate latex paint? And many other examples. So there's a mode there, but it didn't have the width. Then we look at refill stations. Those have been trending quite a bit, bulk dispensing. And again, those work really well for certain products. Whole bean coffee, there's bulk dispensing everywhere, right? But it also, again, has the issue of width. And I would add on maybe a convenience issue as well, because you're asking the consumer to clean and take back to the store. But it has the width issue. Again, many things are not conducive to a refill station. Anything that interacts with oxygen, you couldn't really do through a refill station, because you're going to have an oxygen moment when you're filling. And so we saw pre-fill, which is where the bottle is already filled for you, as today the largest reuse apparatus in the world. It's beverages in Germany, it's beer in Canada, but it's also here in the US, propane tanks for our barbecues and beer kegs. But an interesting issue that exists with all these models is you have to stay in your lane, right? You can't take the empty beer keg to where you got the propane tank. You can't take the propane tank to where you got the beer keg. And even the modalities of reuse don't really interact with each other. And that opened up the issue to be solved, right? In our eyes, to scale reuse, we need a platform where any brand can enter and create a reusable version of their product. And then any retailer can sell any of those products. And then most importantly, for a consumer, you can buy anywhere, return anywhere. Sort of like your garbage can today. Your garbage can doesn't have a point of view on where you bought a product. Your recycling bin doesn't either. It just has a point of view on, is it recyclable? But you could have bought it at retailer A, B, C, or D, or you could have found it on the street, or someone could have given it to you. And so that was an important back step to understand what is our role, right? Because we didn't just want to do yet another something. We wanted to try to create some new capability in the reuse space. And so the way Loop pragmatically works is we first begin with companies, manufacturers, like this is, say, P&G doing, this is a laundry detergent bottle, Tide. Sorry for all the light on it, but they first have to develop something like this, which is a reusable version of their already existing package. Or this is, say, ice cream with Haagen-Dazs. You're seeing some metal, but there's glass. Like this one is glass. This is hand soap. It could be polymer too, plastics. And then they develop that, and our role is to help them do that and approve the product that it is conducive to reuse. 10 uses or more, can be cleaned, and can go through the process safely and efficiently. And then once the product is established, then we work with retailers, like in the UK, Tesco, who then makes it available on their shelves. And they choose from all the products that are approved and create a set in the store, sort of like the idea of organic, almost exactly the same, right? Brands have to create organic products, and then retailers can choose from all those brands and sell those. And then as a consumer, the only difference is you pay a deposit on the pack. That's honestly it. Everything else looks the same. It's product on a shelf, pre-filled, ready to go, like anything else you would buy in the store, which is also a nice convenience benefit, not just to the consumer, but also the brand and the retailer, because for them, everything else is also exactly how they do it today, other than a more durable container. And then very importantly, when the consumer is done with the pack, you could buy, say, your coffee at McDonald's, in a reusable container. This has a £1 deposit on it, but then drop it off at a Tesco or vice versa. And as the network grows, it creates this easy way to play and to not have to worry about that issue of staying in your lane, which we believe is the biggest scale blocking point to reuse today. So from a business model point of view, all these actors pay sort of an onboarding membership fee to cover our human time, like a platform fee, I guess you could call it. And then our operational role, which we charge for, is the waste management function of reuse, which is to put out the bins, collect the dirties, sort them out, clean them if the brands ask us to. Some brands do their own cleaning, and then provide them back for refill. And that's sort of our role, is the waste management of reuse, which doesn't exist today. And that's sort of an operational role to be filled.
So just to kind of bring this to life, because I realize, and some of our audience might be having similar kind of, they've heard Circulire talk about Loop before and TerraCycle before. In the US model, am I clear that that was kind of a delivery model, meaning someone would deliver you your packaged goods? But in the UK model is a bit different, and it's essentially in store. So I would buy my Haagen-Dazs when I was finished. There's a deposit on it. I just give it back at a Tesco and carry on my life.
Yes. So it's interesting because it's sort of all countries did the same journey, right? So we started with, actually, you can see the box behind me, right? With an online learning platform. Because what a lot of retailers told us is, we love it, this is great, but prove to us consumers care, and do the consumer insights proof. So there, in all of those 6 countries, in the UK it was loopstore.co.uk, here.com, we set up an online learning store, if you will, where you can purchase all those products I showed. It's delivered in a reusable case, like the one over there. And then that case is what you put your dirties into, and then we pick it up. And that was to prove that there is enough appetite and really looking at quantitative and qualitative consumer insights to have them then make the investment to go in store. And as the retailers have gone in store, like Tesco has done a number of months ago, we shut down those online learning platforms. And then the retailer really takes its role as the retailer, which can be brick and mortar, a la Tesco, but can also be digital. We have next year a number of online only retailers that are launching that'll run it in a similar model as this, but Loop is not a retailer. So we held that role really in this calendar year, and then it's really being taken over by retailers. Already a bunch have gone live, and then the rest go live next year, where they really take on that role. And this is the key, is all the models interact with each other. So you could buy from an online retailer and return into physical brick and mortar. You can buy from the brick and mortar, return online. It all has to fundamentally flow in a way that you don't have to remember where you bought the product.
Thank you. So that's a good kind of insight in terms of that, because seeing Loop evolve,
yes.
Understanding how it's evolved, I think is really interesting. And also for industry participants who are watching here today, and even policymakers, to understand having those consumer citizen insights are really important to try and nail out the challenges to make this work. And as you said, the convenience is often cited as one of the biggest motivators or demotivators, or confusion about what people should do. So they get overwhelmed going, I don't know what I should do with this, and therefore I do nothing.
Can I just, sorry for interrupting, can I just double click? I want to really reinforce your point here.
Yeah.
You know how in many cases, I'm sure you've heard this a lot, people say, will someone pay more for the organic product, right? Like that's a quintessential question I've heard for 2 decades now. And in Loop, I've learned it may be the wrong question to ask. I would ask the question differently, at least in what I've had learnings on here, is first, is it convenient? That's a black and white gate. If it's not convenient, you just don't even go to the next step. And the gold standard of convenience is disposability today. I don't know anything more convenient than disposability. So is it, in Loop, we would say, is it close enough to disposability to have the consumer pass the gate? But convenience is a black and white gate. Then the next question is, what are the features and benefits, right, of that product? In something like Loop, what we learned, like take the McDonald's coffee cup, the coffee is the identical coffee. It's the same thing from the same machine, but the cup is a much more advanced cup. Yes, it's more eco-friendly or sustainable, but also the lid doesn't come off if you turned it upside down. It has insulation. It's got some nice extra, both objective benefits and physical benefits. It's a very nice, cup. And that then leads the consumer to say, what are those features and benefits worth? And is it reasonably priced? And that's sort of the way to think about at least a decision tree on especially new methods of consumption, right? It's that convenience being the gate, then the features, and then is all that packaged at the right price?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And just lastly, before we open the floor to some questions from participants, I am mindful that there is kind of been a little bit of a pushback saying this is not citizens' responsibility, in the sense of I get you on the convenience, but the fact that this has got to be the citizens and industry and policymakers all kind of figuring the challenges out in order to make these things scalable, as we need to speed up with regards to embracing these new models. Do you have any thoughts on that kind of reflection about,
yes,
100% on the convenience?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, there's this long going conversation around responsibility, right? And there's this wonderful, everyone loves pointing, to someone that is not oneself, right? And I would look at it a little differently. I think we can all agree that we're in a crisis, an urgent crisis from an environmental standpoint. We're in the middle of the explosion, right? Of bad, right? Climate change, species reduction, deforestation, the waste crisis, all of it, right? So there isn't the luxury of time. If we had the luxury of time, maybe we could have the luxury of these sort of conversations. But I would say without the luxury of time, we all have to do everything we can. And so what can we do? We are all citizens. And citizens are voting mostly blindly for the future with what they purchase, which I think is a way more powerful vote than the political vote, which we take all this time discussing and putting news hours against, and like emotion, and how many dinner conversations do we talk about who is going to be the next leader of our country, but we vote for the future we want with what we buy and what we don't buy, right? And one way to look at that is that the brands, the retailers, they're all here to serve our desires, right? So there's this interesting thing. What I mean by this is someone said once, take the baby food industry. So most baby food right now is in pouches because it's so convenient. That's what consumers have been purchasing, right? And they've moved away from the glass jars, right? The ones with the spoon and everything. And the way like you and I probably were fed, right? And okay, so there's a whole, there's a group of really wonderful NGOs who say people should move back to recyclable packaging, right, in the baby food industry. But what would happen? Okay, so let's say I'm baby food. Let's say you and I each have 50% market share, right? And we both do pouches today. You're brand A, I'm brand B. I take that advice and I move, into, let's say, a jar. But consumers are the ones voting, and they, will end up voting for the convenience. So you're just going to take my market share away, and I will end up disappearing, and you'll just have 100% of the market. I'll have 0%, and we will end up having not changed the problem whatsoever, right? So it's really important that we just open our eyes in how we purchase. But then, in addition to being citizens, we also probably can influence organizations with where we work. Maybe we work in the government, maybe we work at retail, maybe we work at brand, whatever, we work somewhere. And let's influence our organizations to do as much as they possibly can, right? To to make choices available, because how can consumers vote if there's no choice, right? But then also to incentivize and make cheaper and more convenient the good choices, and make more expensive and less convenient the bad choices. And that will help edge the voting into the right direction, right? And so it's always both, right? And the problem is, if we say no, it's not the citizen, it's the government. The government says no, it's not us. Then it's entropy. Nothing happens, right? So we, I think, have to just say, what can we as an individual do? We're all citizens, but we also may, have other capabilities in where we work.
And I think it's a very exciting time in the context of Ireland, because the policy makers are establishing a regulatory framework. Citizens have power. There's a lot more kind of awareness and debate and discussion about all of these things. So again, that multifaceted approach and focusing on what we can do, I think, is a very pragmatic way to tackle the crisis. Gary, I'll hand over to you to bring some of the participants' questions to myself and Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Geraldine. And it is a pity I didn't want to interrupt you, because that conversation was excellent. But we do have questions coming in. And the first one up here is from Brian. And it's, in your view, is a levy on virgin plastic the answer to offsetting the issue of oil price fluctuation?
It's a wonderful, wonderful thought. And here's my gut, right? Oil price is everything in the waste management industry. And especially, well, and not even in the recycling industry, it's everything, because it sets the price of what you can sell your output for if you're a recycler. Low oil prices are devastating. High oil prices are really, really good. And so, but there's two levers to think about. One is intrinsic in the question. The other, I'll add on to it. So the higher the price of oil, the better for circular economy, period, right? Now, you can do that by hoping oil price goes up, and it may, or by artificially making it go up, right? And that could be through some government lever of some kind. And you could then go deeper in the oil. It could not be all oil gets more expensive, but maybe a derivative of oil gets more expensive, like virgin plastic. It could, right? Those could be, that's a really good mechanism. But we have to address another issue, which is that right now, almost all product design is from a virgin mentality. What I mean by this is, if, let's say I'm a product designer and I'm hired, to make a shampoo bottle, or let's say, it's a shampoo bottle that has to squeeze to get the shampoo out, a simple object. I'm going to design that, the mold, the everything, right, into what virgin plastic can do, because that's how design works, right? I'm going to design into, because that gives me the biggest ecosystem of materials to choose from and whatnot. And so then I've designed the shampoo bottle, and, off it is in the market. My molds are made, my run times, everything is set. Then my company wakes up and says, well, there's a tax on virgin oil, or virgin plastic, and we need to start using PCR, post-consumer recycled content. But my design mentality was from a virgin point of view. So now I tell my procurement team, please go find me recycled content that behaves like virgin plastic. And you know what happens? My procurement team says, great, let's use beverage containers, which is, by the way, what everyone uses. If you're making a shampoo bottle, if you're making another beverage container, if you're making carpet, a backpack, a t-shirt from PET, you're always using beverage containers. And there's just not enough of that stuff to go around. And so the other thing we have to really solve for, beyond the economic levers, which is what I think the question very accurately looked at, is how do we start designing into a waste mentality? Like saying the waste stream is our input, what can we make out of that, right? Versus a virgin mentality, and then trying to somehow have waste take over the as the input, because it's going to be very, very difficult in that challenge. It's, excuse me, a design issue, but an input laden one. So I think we have to do both. The second is really not thought about right now much. The first one I think will help, but what we're going to run into is all the material will be gone. Already today, one other way to look at this is, if you add up all the public commitments that companies have made through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation around the use of PCR, there's 10 times more demand than supply. And we're 3 years from go date, and the supply isn't increasing, right? So it's already in a 10 times over demand situation, and it's because of this design principle that is occurring.
Yeah, and then, as you say, what happens is recycled alternatives become more expensive than virgin, because the demand has so quickly
already. Yeah, and it will.
And then And then that economic argument also becomes hard to make because it's costing more than virgin materials. And then it's almost like the unintended consequence we're back in. And it harks back to your point about needing to look at the system that we are designing in and the materials and that whole mentality, as you say, not from virgin materials, but as seeking to use the wastes as resources for certain applications.
And really try for the worst waste, right? Right now we're picking the very best, the cream on the top, right? But like dig down. And then, by the way, if you design products that go deeper into the waste stream, the really undesirables, you're going to be tapping into things no one has demand for, and you can really protect your position until people wake up and emulate you.
Excellent. Okay, another question coming in from Neil. Often the recycler struggles to valorize the materials they want to recycle when they are not standard materials. Do TerraCycle Loop work as an intermediary between recycler and retailer to find solutions for existing materials?
Very good question. So a recycler's business model is simple. You have the cost of collecting and processing the waste versus what you can sell it for. And if what you can sell it for is higher, you'll do it. And if what you can sell it for is lower, you won't do it. And that's how a traditional recycling model works. TerraCycle's model is different. We go to a company and say, you care disproportionately about writing instruments or about cosmetics or about coffee cups. You pick the waste stream. We will be able to set up a platform to solve that issue for you at whatever scale you want to invest against it. We need you to cover whatever it's going to cost us to collect, whatever it's going to cost us to process, minus whatever we can sell it for. And that is our business equation. So it doesn't matter if the material value is lower than the cost of collection and processing. In all of our models, it is. It doesn't even matter how much lower it is, because the proposition that is being sold is somewhat different. Now, then, to help the recycling industry, we don't own operations typically. We do a little bit as we're getting bigger, but not, our policy is to try to steer away from that and instead use existing infrastructure, sorting facilities, processors, and so on, to help give them more business, and then we help have them run the materials in the way we need them run. Sometimes we invent the solutions, sometimes we cobble different solutions together to create a supply chain. We many times invest in the equipment for the recyclers to install certain capacities. And then we have them run for us whatever things we need run, whether it's sorting or processing. And then the end market, well, it's easy. There's always an end market at the right price. As long as you can formulate into an application's needs, if you just set the price right, there's almost infinite end market. It just may not be enough to cover the cost of collection and processing. And that's the way we sort of look at how to create these solutions. Because today, the entire recycling industry is focused on only one value input, which is the value of the material at the outside, when it's finished. We say there's many other points of value. Maybe, recycling can help drive foot traffic, market share, preference, all these other things that once you unlock those values, that can help the equation become more dynamic. Right now, it's a very tough and very sensitive business equation because you only have one output value, and you don't even set the price. It's set by market conditions.
This one is from Antonia, who asks, once a big player like Tesco, McDonald's signs up in a country, for example, Ireland, how long does it take for the network to grow sufficiently to start seeing real change, downward trend in disposable consumption?
It's an excellent question. And I think it probably takes more time than any of us would like. To give you our journey so far, mind you, Loop is 3 years old, right? So year one was sort of getting, some brands up and running. Year two was about proving the online model, as Geraldine and I already discussed. Then the year we're in, year three, is about proving it in store. Next year is going to start about scaling stores. And I think that a retailer like Tesco would probably be fully national everywhere, and that's just one retailer from start to finish, say 5 years, right? And we're entering into year three or two, depending on the retailer. And then you have to get a lot of other retailers. And so I think that, a movement like this, the reuse movement, not just Loop, but the reuse movement in its new sort of renaissance is probably going to grow at the same rate as the idea of organic went. That's the closest benchmark I can think of, because the proxies are almost identical. It's ask manufacturers to make in a new way and then sell in the store, originally in a section of the store, the organic section. Here it's the reuse section. And then if it gets bigger, maybe it goes, more in line. And what organic took probably 20 years to get to 7%, 8%. That's sort of what we're looking at. And I would preface by saying that's probably, underwhelming, But this is the rate of change, especially when you're asking all these actors to shift, right? And now one other thing I just want to point on to, it's also interesting that the reason people buy reuse or loop is the same reason people buy organic, right? And it's ironic in both cases. You know, organic farming was invented for ecology, you know, for the birds and the bees, right? But the reason people buy it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with improvement in human health, which is the most selfish of reasons to buy organic food, mind you. It's not for the butterflies and the birds and the bees and all those reasons it was invented. Reuse too. You know, we created Loop because we felt like it was more sustainable. But the reason people buy it, yes, some folks, more women than men, buy it because of sustainability. But a big reason, they're more beautiful, functional, better packages, which is selfish, and especially in food and bev, because they perceive that it is healthier for them to, you know, eat ice cream out of, say, a stainless steel container than a paper container coated with plastic. Isn't it interesting, right? That, well, so that's the direct answer to your question, how fast it'll scale. But, you know, the decision-making, you know, for consumers is mostly self-centered. And yes, one can be disappointed by that, but it's also hopefully, you know, helps as you try to implement anything, is you got to play into those desires, right? Than to hope that they're not there, because they're there in spades.
So I'm going to take back the conch just for the last 5 minutes. And what I wanted you to, or I guess my ask of you, Tom, in addition to saying a huge thank you, was to close off, if you were to give 3 tips or recommendations to kind of the different types of people we've been speaking here today. We have small enterprise, new ventures, and then we have decision makers, both in government and bigger organizations. For those 3 different segments, what would your recommendations be in light of all, I suppose, the experiences you've had over the last 20 years? If you could give 3 recommendations around this embracing the circular economy model, what would they be?
I think I have 3. I was writing them down as you asked your question. But I think these could be applied to more than a circular economy. As I look at them, I think this can all be applied to any sort of thing we're trying to implement to help make the world better, right? From a sustainability point of view. So if it's about shifting from animal protein to plant protein, I think you could apply the same questions. But I think the first one is spend some time addressing the white elephant in the room, personally or within your organization. And the white elephant in the room is the only solution to sustainability, period, is going to be a monstrous reduction in consumption. We can't vegan and circular economy our way into intrinsic sustainability because we just buy too much. And wherever that wonderful product came from could have still been, instead of a farm, it could have been forest. Instead of a mine, it could have been the natural, you know, it could have been habitat. So we have to address it. And it's so difficult to address it because our entire system of everything is tied up into, we're better if we buy more. Individually, from a country level, our tax revenue is linked to, you know, the size of our economy, our company, every motivation in our society is linked to buy more, right? And so spend some time discussing how to reduce that. And it is really hard, so just give it some time because that has to develop, right? And that is the only silver bullet. And I think, by the way, we're going to get there, whether we like it or not, with the earth hitting back, right? You know, I mean, look at, you know, when we have you know, climate change, things get more expensive. You know, when Texas froze in the US, a lot of supply chains got disrupted, prices went up, right? So it's going to happen, but can we do that voluntarily through pain versus painfully? Then I think the next, that's 1. 2 would be the most important thing I've learned in implementing and then scaling sustainability concepts is make sure that that concept reinforces the organization's core purpose of being, which is almost never do the right thing, right? It's, if it's a retailer, it's increase your penetration, you know, brand, probably very similar, you know what I mean? And make sure that that idea reinforces that. And the more it reinforces, the more security you've developed that it will scale without the right actors needing to be there, like a certain champion who's going to fight disproportionately for it. Because if that person disappears, then your idea disappears typically with them. And a good litmus test for how to know if you've hit this is if the stakeholder that you're working with says, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, that's a really bad sign. That means they haven't figured out any other reason to do it other than the moral or ethical imperative. And again, then it will be dependent on that stakeholder being there championing for it, and it will probably not scale. And the third is accept the motivations and the way people are and organizations are as the way chess pieces in the chessboard in a chessboard move. Like I just mentioned, consumers are unbelievably self-centered in their decisions. Okay, let's accept that, because if you know how the pieces in the chessboard move, you have a higher chance of winning than if you move them in the way you hope they move. You'll never win the game, right? So if we hope consumers are going to change behavior, I think we don't have time for that. Let's just accept consumers for the way they are and then work within that constraint. And I think we'll have way higher success in the short term.
Well, Tom, again, it has been an utmost pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for giving us your time. I think some really important insights based on your journey with TerraCycle. And fundamentally, just to bring it back to why you set up TerraCycle was because you were disillusioned with kind of the purpose of business to be to create profit, but effectively profit, like oxygen for breathing, is not the reason we exist. And ultimately grappling with that paradox of understanding that things are not going to change because we hope or desire, but fundamentally we do need to, I guess, accept things as they are as we design the new systems to effectively replace them and do things in a new way. So thank you so much. As I said, for those, there were quite a number of questions which I will send on to you so we can get back to those who joined today later in the week. But thank you again so much for your time. And I hope that, again, once COVID, or as soon as, if there's an opportunity to come to Ireland in person, we'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for all attending and your wonderful questions. And my apologies, we didn't address them here, but we'll try to get back to you on them.
Thank you.